I am Allison Kranek. I direct the Writing Center here at Ohio State, and I'm delighted to join you all for a special collaboration with the Ohio Union Activities Board, and particularly for programming toward graduate and professional students. So Crystal told me that working with APA citations was a popular request. So I cannot promise that our session today will be scintillating. There's only so much we can do to make citations fun and exciting. But I hope we'll be able to kind of take away some key tools with our workshop today. So we're gonna kind of get started by thinking a little bit about our previous experiences with citation, think about things that have been challenging as we've worked with citation in the past. Our aim here will be sort of to equip you with like the key components of APA style. So we'll talk through some, structural things with APA style, in-text citations and reference list citations. And then we'll wrap up by sharing some additional citation resources at OSU and beyond. So our goal today is unfortunately not to equip you with every little nuance related to APA style, but to really kind of grasp the big picture and those key components, and then help equip you with some resources to work on these individual citations with the sources that you're using afterward. So that's kind of where we're headed today. I would love for us to just kind of get started by thinking a little bit about our previous experiences with citation and just kind of getting a better sense of what brings you here today. So I'd love to know, just to, feel free to reflect in the chat. What citation styles, if any, do you feel most comfortable using? Have you used APA before? Is this brand new to you? I'd also love to know what maybe has been challenging about either learning new citation styles or using new citation styles. And then just any resources that you currently use, again, if any, for creating citations and formatting citations. So I'll give you a moment to just think through these questions and feel free to share with us in the chat here your thoughts or responses to any of these questions about your previous citation experience. Thanks to everyone chiming in the chat so far. Looks like we have a variety of resources and tools that you all already use. So seeing some Google Scholar, definitely taking advantage of the Purdue OWL and their citation resources. And then some of you are using different sorts of tools like Grammarly that are a little bit more interactive, or citation management systems like Zotero or EndNote. Let's see. And then some of the challenges are just kind of generally, how do we work with citations that aren't the kind of like most common citation styles? So I saw a note up here with legal citation, anything that's not a journal article for citation. And then also seeing some questions here about things like EndNote and how to navigate that for like less traditional sources. And then also seeing some use of Mendeley here, and then going back to manual for some logistical reasons here. So you have kind of a range of experiences with APA, and I assume kind of people just coming to this workshop with a range of um, comfort and familiarity with APA. So what we'll try to do today, again, is to focus a bit on the big picture of APA, but also try to kind of tailor it to some of these questions, or allow some room or space to get at these questions toward the end. And then we'll also share, I'd love to hear from all of you a little bit later on about your experience with these different tools. What has your experience been like when you've used Citation with Grammarly? Seeing some different challenges with using other citation management systems that are supposed to make your life easier, but maybe raise other challenges too. So let's definitely plan to kind of focus a little bit on that toward the end. So thank you so much for sharing all of these, and it's helpful to get a better sense of what brings people here today. So just to get us started, right? This might seem like a silly question, especially as like graduate and professional students, but like why do we cite, right? Why does APA style even exist, right? Why are you having to jump through all of these hoops to work with citations and work through citations? So feel free to let us know in the chat, or if you feel comfortable unmuting, you can feel free to chime in that way too. Thanks, Rudy, for getting us started here. So we might cite to make a standard. Having a standard across a discipline or across journals helps us all kind of work with the same guidelines. We've also noted here trying to avoid plagiarism. Of course, that's very important here. Consistent or standardized citation styles also make it easier for us to have kind of a standard organization, so it makes it easier for readers to follow. We definitely want to be clear about what sources are ours, or what ideas are ours, versus where we're using sources to back up our ideas, and allow others to go back and sort of find the sources that you've used. And then I'm also seeing a note here from Caleb too, to keep in mind that citation styles are constantly changing over time, and I know that makes your life harder as a graduate or professional student, but they're often doing so in response to changes in technology and those sorts of things. So lots of reasons why we cite, but sometimes difficult to keep that in mind when we're so focused on the kind of the intricacies of actually putting together a citation. But I know it can be really frustrating when there are so many different citation styles. And so it's important to remember that while citation styles can feel really arbitrary, can just feel like somebody made it up one day and just to make your life more difficult, that's actually not the case. And that citation styles really were designed to work towards some of that standardizing, as some of you have mentioned in the chat. But they also have developed to reflect disciplinary priorities and values, depending on the field that you're in. So it might seem like there are just random differences between, let's say, MLA style and APA style, but those differences are actually very intentional and not random. And so it's important to remember that actual people and leaders in our disciplines have met to develop these standards. And then again, as Caleb noted, have also periodically met to revisit them and revise them as technology changes, as different sorts of sources become common. And that does, again, means that they're constantly evolving, and that can make it really tricky to keep up with. But at least for APA, we're currently working with the 7th edition, which is the most recent style that has come out. But just as an example of this sort of disciplinary difference in citation practices, I want to share a quick example from APA as well as MLA to give you a sense of sort of these disciplinary values and how they actually impact and materialize in our citations. So APA, most commonly used in the social sciences. For those of you who are in the social sciences and using APA, feel free to let us know your home department or discipline in the chat so we can get a sense for the range of disciplines. But APA is most commonly used in the social sciences, whereas MLA is most commonly used in the humanities. So you've taken English classes, you've taken history classes, you were likely asked to use MLA. But these disciplines have different disciplinary values. So if we're thinking about APA style being commonly used in social sciences, then we're thinking about things like social science research, things in psychology, things in nursing, things in business, studies that really especially value how recent research is. Like, do we want to draw on a study from 1950 or do we want to draw on a study from 2021? And so it's really important for us to know when this information was published so that we get a better sense of how recent and relevant it is. What that means in terms of APA citation style is that the date is really important to both in-text and reference citations. So it appears in both our in-text citations and it appears in the reference page really early on, so right after the author. Not that authorship isn't important in APA, but it's a little bit less important than it is in MLA, where authorship is really key. So again, what this means, practically speaking, is in APA, we're mainly concerned with authors' last names and we abbreviate authors' first names. Whereas in MLA, we're really, really, really concerned with authorship and kind of individual ideas. If we're working with historical documents or, a classic piece of literature, the dates aren't really going to change, right? It doesn't necessarily matter if we're reading a version of Pride and Prejudice published in, it's whenever its original publication date is. I should probably know that. Or if we're reading one that was published recently, because the author's original text doesn't change. And so authorship is really key, and we see that reflected in both the in-text citations and in the work cited. But for MLA, the date appears not at all in in-text citations, and it appears at the very end of a works cited entry. So again, this is just kind of a quick example to share what feels like a lot of these things might be arbitrary, actually have real purpose and reason depending on the discipline. And so it's just good to kind of keep in mind that as the big picture, that these actually developed out of somewhere and for a particular reason. As we think about key components of APA style, especially as compared to MLA, there are a few just sort of key differences. Some of them are really short and simple. Some of these are just differences in terms of framing. So APA style uses a consistent structure throughout, but one of the big differences, especially compared to an MLA paper, is that APA uses a title page style. They often, maybe not always, but often include an abstract. And then their paper is often structured using headings that, again, help it make it a little bit easier for readers to follow. And then you have a references page. It's not called a works cited, but it's essentially the same thing. And again, you use a consistent citation format throughout with in-text citations and reference lists. So kind of big picture, there's a title page, maybe an abstract. It's going to use headings, which you may not always see with other citation styles. But in general, like basically every other citation style, we're still going to use in-text citations, and we're still going to have a reference list at the end of the piece. In terms of thinking about what APA style values, so before we get into sort of any of the formatting questions or concerns, again, APA style values consistency. They want to make it sort of as easy as possible for your reader and your audience to be able to follow along. So that materializes in both the headings, that materializes a bit in the title page. They also value really clear and precise language. That's true for a lot of writing, but APA goes out of their way to say this. Um, as part of creating clear and precise language, they also often prefer active voice rather than passive voice. They're also especially interested in, and then this is a more recent development with APA and using bias-free language, and we can certainly talk about that as well. And then again, compared to something like MLA, which really focuses heavily on using direct quotations from a source, historical document, literary document, and that sort of thing, APA really prefers that you try to put things in your own words and you paraphrase and you only use direct quotations when absolutely necessary, when there's no way that you can say it yourself. That again kind of works towards some of the goals above: clear and precise language, using active voice, being consistent in structure. So all of these things kind of work together with APA. So what do we know so far, or if at all, about just the overall structure of an APA paper? So if you've written something in APA, what kind of structure did that typically follow? What kind of headings might you have used in your paper? So just, yeah, general familiarity with overall paper structure with APA. It's always hard to tell on Zoom, on Zoom if a question doesn't make sense, or if people are thinking about it, but I'm just gonna go ahead and skip ahead here. Um, so like I said, one of the key differences with APA is that it does use a title page. Fortunately, this is pretty simple and easy. There's a very standard structure that this follows, so it should be easy to fill in. So this title page is often going to include your paper title, which will be bolded. It's going to include your name and any co-authors' names. It'll include your departmental or university affiliation. It'll also often include if it's being written as part of a course assignment versus like a journal article. It'll often include the course number and the course name, as well as your instructor's name, again, if it's being written for a course, and then the due date. So pretty simple information, hopefully information that's really easy for all of you to access. And what that's going to look like in a different sort of way here. It's going to be centered on the separate title page. It's going to be double spaced as well. And so this is an example of what it might look like. So we have the paper title, which is bolded, the sample paper from APA advising psychology majors about grad school and psychology, current practices and challenges. So we can see the paper title there. You can see there are multiple authors' names included here, as well as their departmental and university affiliation. We also can see that they're taking this for a 4,000 level psychology course. You can see their instructor's name and the due date of this paper. So just a little bit different, some of the same information you might include in an MLA paper, but it is its own separate title page. And I will share some links in the chat afterward, directing you to additional resources for formatting this page. But something that you can do kind of at the outset of an assignment that will help you feel maybe like you're getting started on this. And then we'll also note, you can see in the top right corner, the page numbers also start on that page. So you will include that as sort of page number 1 as well. I don't want to spend too much time into this because I think we can really get into the weeds about formatting and headings. But APA has sort of a consistent format that they want you to follow if you're using headings throughout your paper. Again, they have some samples that we can share with you that will show you what this actually looks like in practice. But generally, what you should know is that headings are important. They help organize your work. They help orient your reader to wherever they might be in your text. And then there are also just some sort of key formatting things to keep in mind, depending on whether you're working with a header or a subheader. And so you can see APA goes all the way down to 5 levels of headings. Hopefully you don't need that much, but you should know that each of those are formatted slightly differently, whether that's being bolded or italicized, whether it's kind of flush left with your margins or indented. So these are going to look a little bit different depending on how many headings and subheadings you have in your work. But again, I don't think that's the question that brings a lot of you here, so we won't get too in the weeds about that. So real fast, for those of you who have used APA citations before, what are the key components that we might include in an in-text citation for APA? Awesome, thanks, Caleb. So author and year, those are sort of the key bits of information that we're going to include. So generally, we should use an in-text citation whenever you're citing the words or ideas of others. Hey, Mac, this is not what we're doing right now, okay? I'm so sorry, my dog is being very needy. We just adopted her. So she apologizes for being so excited about APA citations. So you should use in-text citations anytime you're paraphrasing or quoting from a source. So that won't change. And of course, anytime you're drawing from the ideas of others, we want to have that citation there to indicate that those aren't your ideas. So all those are toward your goals of acknowledging sort of intellectual property, avoiding plagiarism. And as our participants have noted in the chat, APA uses what we would call the author date format for in-text citations. So again, we talked about the date being really, really important for our readers and for APA and the disciplines in which it's used. So it will typically have just the author and then the date, the publication year. Again, that's going to give us that quick sense of how recent that work is. But of course, we want to keep in mind that in-text citations are also there to direct readers to our reference page. And so they're partially serving that function to show your sources, but they're also directing people to your reference page where they can find your sources if they want to learn more. The other thing I'll note here, since it didn't come up in the chat here, is that occasionally in in-text citations, you will also include a page number. And in those cases, it's only when you're doing a direct quotation would you include a page number for this. So one example would be if I were, let's say, citing a Harry Potter book. I'm just going to include this here. Right, I'm just going to include this example in the chat. So if I were quoting a piece from a Harry Potter book, I would have the author's last name, and then I would include the publication year, and then I would include the little P.14. This is something that has changed over time. It used to be PP14. People literally met and talked about it and debated including this. So like I said, this is something that people get really worked up about, but is a pretty easy thing to just sort of keep in mind here. So you only need a page number when you're including a direct quotation. That potentially could be a reason to encourage you to use fewer direct quotations. So it makes it a little bit easier for you to cite. So that's kind of in-text citations, the basics here. I know, so I think we answered one of the questions that one of you had about when to use a page number in citations. Mackenzie, no. In terms of actually incorporating in-text citations into your pieces, you'll still use the author date format, but you have basically two main options. One is to use parenthetical citations, so just to put the author and date in parentheses at the end of your sentence or wherever it fits in your sentence. The other is to actually incorporate the author's name into the text of your sentence. And in that case, you would just still put the year in parentheses. So both of those work. There's no kind of better way or better choice here, but those are both possibilities as long as the author and year are being reflected in those in-text citations. Yeah. If you have questions about in-text citations, you can feel free to drop them in the chat and we can come back to them. I do want to be sure we get through just some of these quick references things, and then we can open it up for more conversation. So we don't go into a spiral about a little citation question. So you've written your paper, you've done your in-text citations. Now you need to actually write or create your full references and create that reference page. So just like your title page, this is a separate page. And just like most citation lists like this, you'll still list these alphabetically by author's last name. These will be double spaced like the rest of your APA paper. And it will use the hanging indent, the sort of common way we format citations across many citation styles. So those are kind of general practices guiding references, no matter what kind of source they are. So many of you have questions about how to cite particular kinds of sources. And so again, it's helpful to back up and again, think about the big picture here. So regardless of the source that you're trying to cite, APA citations typically include these 4 elements in this order. And so this should kind of guide you as you move forward. So obviously author is going to be listed first. It's how we're organizing our reference page. We've already talked about the date being really important. Then we're going to want to include whatever the title information is. That might be a book title, journal article title, maybe it's a post on social media. So this is going to have a lot of sort of variety and diversity in terms of what this will look like. And then we kind of want to incorporate what they call the source element, which is like, where can we find this source? If it's a book, that might include the publishing information. If this is an online source, we might be including a URL. If this is a journal article, we want to know which journal and which issue we can find it in. So where you get kind of the most variety and where you get into some of those tricky areas are especially going to be for this 4th source element. And again, I'll share some resources to help you navigate some of the intricacies of those different kind of sources. But typically we're going to follow this order and follow it in this format. So if you're more visual, a different way of looking at this is to kind of look at this sort of in a color-coded kind of way. So if you're citing a book, right, we're going to still have the author's names appearing first. This is in this sort of yellow section. Again, as we've talked about, the author name is important, but we're mostly interested in author last names. And so we'll just use initials for first names. But that information will still go first. If you have multiple authors, you'll include an ampersand here. Then we'll have in parentheses the copyright year or the date if it's more of like a news article. So we have author and date. And then for a book, obviously the title would be the title of the book. We get into some of the formatting intricacies here. In your reference page, we'll only use what we call title case or like sentence case. So you only capitalize the first letter of the title instead of all the words that come after it. It's one of those kind of sillier little things that make it different than other citation styles. And then remember that last bit of information is the source. So in the case of a book, that's going to be the publisher. If it's an ebook or a digital book, it might also have a DOI or a URL. So kind of general author, date, title, and source information. So it gets pretty simple with books. Journal articles follow a similar structure, but they have a bit more information to help us get to that particular issue. So it's still going to look very much the same at the beginning of a citation. We're still going to have the author. We're still going to have the year. In this case, the title would be the title of the article. Little formatting note here. The title just sort of appears. You don't need to include quotation marks or anything to indicate that it's a title. In this case, the source information is going to be the journal article or the journal where it appears and any sort of volume or issue number. Those are going to be italicized. If you have the issue number, that's not italicized. And then we're going to have those page numbers where we can find that journal article. And again, if there's a digital component to this, a DOI or a URL, that can go at the end of this citation as well. So kind of the pretty basic author, date, title, and source information, but it's just going to look a little bit different depending on the type of source you have. So I know we had a lot of questions here, and so I want to be sure we have space for these. As I was preparing for this, I wasn't quite sure where people kind of landed on the spectrum. Had you used APA before? How comfortable do you feel with it? Are you using citation managers? How are those going for you? So I want to kind of pause here, share some additional resources, and then we can open it up for a larger conversation, either audio or video, or in the chat as well. So there are you have a wealth of resources to use as you're figuring out how to use APA and how to cite your particular sources, but it can be hard to sift through all of those. That's what I'm here for. That's what this workshop is here for. APA does a really excellent job of putting together an incredibly robust set of, they call them instructional guides, but it's really a series of resources, handouts, checklists, if that's the kind of thing that works for you, on literally every component of APA style. So if you're kind of like, I'm writing APA for the first time, I need help setting up just kind of the big picture title page and structure and organization, they have a lovely guide that's annotated that gives you some additional examples beyond what we've shared here. Maybe you're writing an abstract for the first time, or you're trying to figure out how to pick out keywords. They also have a really handy guide about that. Again, we've talked about those different components of citations, and they have a really great sort of worksheet that will help you find that info based on the source that you're working with, and kind of allow you to build your citations. And then I'm not sure if many of you are working on like course papers or journal articles at this point, but they also have kind of particular sections for a very common structure for an APA journal article. And then they include some sample papers, right? So you can see what something might look like from start to finish. And they're pretty good about including both sample student papers, so something you might write for a course, and professional sample papers, so things you might find more published. So again, I will be happy to link all of these resources, and these are all clickable when I send along these slides. So these are just a handful that I've pulled out, but they have a ton of really robust ones depending on where you have questions and where you might want to look a little closer. Sorry, I didn't mean to go back there. Some of you have already mentioned that you're using the Purdue OWL. They have, again, more very comprehensive APA citation resources. So if you've already used the Purdue OWL, if you found it helpful, that is sort of the place where I would recommend to continue going. They don't quite have the same sorts of handouts that the APA site has, but you might just prefer the layout or organization of their information. So they can be really useful too. And then I know many of you have mentioned using additional like citation management systems, Zotero, Mendeley, and of course the OSU libraries also maintain some really robust resources for using citations and dealing with different citation styles. So you have plenty of resources to choose from, but I also recognize that like sometimes you just want that kind of one-on-one support. And we can provide that for you in the OSU Writing Center as well. So if what you really need is to kind of just have a session with us and kind of work through some of these individual citation questions, we can absolutely do that with you as well. Because I know sometimes just providing a resource still doesn't quite help you get to where you want to be. I'm happy to talk more about the Writing Center and how we can help you during Q&A, but if you're interested in individualized citation support, the library can work with you here, but we can also work with you in the Writing Center. And our kind of go.osu.edu link is just /get feedback. So hopefully an easy one to remember. So we have a handful of questions that some of you have shared in the chat here. So let's start with some of the bigger picture questions about, let's say, questions about in-text citations. So you can see one comment in the chat here for in-text citations. Is there a specific order I need to follow, year or name? You should always start with the name. So that citation should always look like the author's name first, because that's how it's going to be listed in your reference page, and that's how people are going to find it. And I will absolutely share the PowerPoint and all these clickable links afterward so that you can have this for reference. What other questions do we have? So I know we had some, I'm just scrolling up through the chat here. See, some of you had some questions about those citation management. The DOI is always optional. Usually what they recommend, Rudy, here is if there is one, you should just go ahead and include it. I will say the reason for that, if there is a DOI or if there is a URL, is because it just makes it easier for you and your readers to find that page exactly, or to find that source exactly. So rather than me going through a journal and sifting through the volumes and trying to find the particular issue and then the particular article, the DOI or the URL is just going to get me there faster. Now URLs change, of course, over time. So many journals now offer like a stable URL that is, you know, theoretically supposed to be there. But if you have it, I would recommend using it. And it's only going to be there in those cases where, mostly in those cases of journal articles. Let's see. We have a question here. When do we use M-? Only a page number. Let's see. Are these two, are these two related questions or are they separate questions? A related question. Okay, thank you. So for the page numbers, you might use it if you're quoting, if you're using this in an in-text citation and you have a quotation that goes from one page onto the next page, then you would want to, and again, I'm just going to keep picking on Harry Potter books here because that's the one that's coming to mind for me right now. If I have a quote that's going from one page to the next page, then I might include page numbers in this particular sort of example that I'm citing in the chat here. So you really only need to kind of use those when you're doing the page number, when there are multiple page numbers at play here. Does that answer your question?
So my question is, if I have like multiple papers, so I am doing in-text citation,
Okay.
so I'm citing more than one paper. Is there a specific order?
Yeah, so it should always follow alphabetical order.
Okay.
So yeah, that's how you would kind of list it, and then they would be separated by semicolons, so you actually wouldn't use an M- or any sort of dash here.
Okay.
So I'm just going to take a couple of all of your last names here. We're going to make you authors if you're not already. So even if the sources have a variety of dates here, like you're still going to go by alphabetical order because that's how people are going to find it in your works cited page. And then I'm just going to add, let me find one more writer here. So I've included in the chat here an example of how we might handle that in-text citation when we're citing multiple sources, and we're trying to figure out how to list them. So even though, again, I've made up these publications here, which you shouldn't do, this is just for purposes of our discussion here, even though even though there's a 2023 source that would be the most recent, we would still want to start alphabetically by last name, and that's how we would decide that order, because that's how they're going to appear in the reference page, and that's how it's going to be easiest for us to find them. And I will also say generally, APA sort of feels strongly that you should include only the citations that are really relevant. So I know like sometimes as grad students, we might feel like we want to do that big sort of citation dump to show that we've been doing our work and to show that we've been doing the research. But APA in particular, really, they want to be sure that you're only including the in-text citations for things that are really relevant to what you're talking about here. So they also want to be sure you don't oversight, which is kind of it's kind of I think a hard, tricky thing to think through. Let's see, what other questions do we have? And let's stick for now with questions about APA, and then we can maybe shift gears to talking about some of your experiences with different citation management systems. So I'm just scrolling up through the chat here to see what other questions we might have. What other questions do we have right now? And you can feel free to type, you can feel free to unmute if that would be more useful. I know some of these things just take a little bit of explaining too. And I know we had a question about citing legal bills. So I don't actually know that off the top of my head right now, but I'm happy to follow up with a specific resource that can direct you to that. Other questions about APA that we didn't answer already?
I have a question about the issue number.
Mhm.
So I know that sometimes we shouldn't include the issue number if each journal starts with page 1. Not those running on systems like where they start as maybe page 100 or something. But I don't know how do I know about this specific new journal's formatting style? Do I just go in and look for each journal's? Like I've been doing that myself, so I don't know if that's the smart way to do it.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm wondering, have others of you had this challenge or developed some workarounds for that? And I'm actually just going to pull up a resource that I can share with us all here, so that we can look at this in more detail. And feel free to keep those questions coming in the chat, and we will get back to those shortly. Like I said, their website is really robust, but that does mean there are a lot of things to sift through. So just hang tight here. And then we can also tackle this question, the additional question I'm seeing here about how do you decide to order citations that have the same author and same year. So we can touch base on that too. So for this broader question about how do we handle citing journal articles, and knowing kind of whether to include the issue number or not. So I'm going to share in the chat this resource that we can pull up, and then I can share my screen in a moment too. I'm gonna stop talking for a second because I'm having trouble doing both of those things at the same time. This will actually also be a really good opportunity for me to share an example of what the APA resources look like. So when you go, if you go to the APA style site, they have this section under instructional aids called handouts and guides. Again, I'll send you the direct link. But kind of depending on where you're feeling, where your questions are mostly kind of arising, they've got a lot of different resources and even like checklists here that can be really helpful. So they have kind of these general resources. They have some that are focused more on paper formatting. So I know some of you had questions about what do the headings look like? How do I know where to put them? Some of you have questions about in-text citations, and some of you have questions about the reference list. And then there's just some additional things that have to do more with writing style. So this is, I think, a good place where I would go. I've already clicked on this guide to common reference examples, which I'm also going to share in the chat so that you can take a look at it directly. So if we pull that up for a moment and I will zoom in on this, we can kind of take a closer look at some of these questions about journal articles and whether whether we include the issue or not. So these aren't necessarily organized in a like super useful way. But I would typically kind of lean more toward, if there's an issue number, you should just go ahead and include it. If you see that information clearly on a source that you're pulling up. So if we were to pull up this particular source that is linked here, unpacking the unique relationship, it's actually already giving us a citation here, which is great. But it is clearly sort of showing that there's an issue number. If it didn't show an issue number, then I just wouldn't include that. But the issue number shouldn't be difficult to find. And it's just really going to depend on the journal and whether they do sort of an annual publication or they have multiple issues appearing throughout the year. So that's kind of, generally it seems more of like a case-by-case basis. If they seem to have provided an issue for you, I would just go ahead and include it. Again, the more specific we can be about the source we're working with, the better. So it's as easy as possible for people to get to that particular page. But if you're hunting around and you can't find that particular citation you can't find an issue number, then that's also like generally a signal that there probably isn't one. And so you just would leave that out. And that's kind of the general rule for all these citations, which is APA has a general guide to follow, and you include as much information as you can find that will help readers find the piece. But like some digital sources aren't going to show the date, or some sources might have maybe a title that's not clear. And so we're just kind of trying to provide, they might not have page numbers, right? So we're just trying to provide as complete information as we can using these particular guides. Does that answer your question? That was like a really long, possibly complicated response to that question. Let's see, and I want to go back to Caleb's question here. How do we separate in-text citations that might use the same author in the same year? So I think this one is going to be, again, easier to show visually. So let me share, give me just a moment and I will share a link so you can see this visually. as well. So this source that I've dropped in the chat here, this is one that it was also linked in the PowerPoint, but it can be really good for those sources where you're trying to find the information that you need and try to piece it all together depending on the source it is. So it's giving some examples here of citing different types of sources. Caleb, this is not getting quite to your question yet, but it is a resource that I want to be sure you all know exists and can be helpful. And if I were writing in APA style right now, I think one of the things I would find really helpful is this checklist that APA maintains that kind of helps get us to think through these kinds of questions. So like, how do we organize a reference page when there's multiple authors? So again, give me just a moment and I'm going to drop this additional link in the chat and then we can chat a bit more about that question. And again, feel free to drop some additional questions if you have them in the chat so I know where we might be heading.
Allison, I've got one more for you while you're typing, if that's okay.
Thank you. Yeah, go for it.
Along these same lines, if let's say I have the same author in the same year, how do you determine, because I know everything has to be done alphabetically. So if you have the same author in different years, I assume you start with the most recent year, or do you go with the oldest?
That is a really good, that's a really good question. So when you're talking about same author, so let's just say it's like a single author, not a series of multiple, like the same first author, but multiple different authors.
Right.
Is that right? Okay. Yeah, so this gets super tricky and I want to be sure that I don't tell you the wrong thing here. Because this happens a lot, especially when you're in a particular field that is that is drawing from a lot of research. So you would actually, I'm going to include an example of this in the chat, and I will also make a note to send this directly over email. You will basically use, right, so we would actually use the like alphabetical rule again here. So I'm gonna show this example in the chat so that you can kind of see this directly. Actually, I'll just go ahead and share my screen here, so that will be useful too. So let's say we're using just kind of this exact case you're talking about. We have a single author. We have two pieces that were published in the same year. So there are two ways we might differentiate them. So the first thing APA recommends is double check to see if maybe we have some more specific publication dates beyond just the year. So what I might do here is like, let's say this first piece that's listed, let's say it was published in like the February issue or like the first issue of the year. That might signal to me that that is like an earlier date where it was published, and maybe the second piece came from a November-December issue. So I might see if there's a more particular month or date that helps us kind of figure out which one of these is more recent. And so they're actually, they prefer to have us listed chronologically, which here seems like it's suggesting less recent to more recent. But in the event that you can't find that information, then again, it's kind of going to use some of these sort of suffix, like they call it here suffix, but I think that's a little confusing. So we would just sort of signal with the year here, 2004A. We're going to include that information in our in-text citation as well, so people know which of this 2004 sources you're going to. You can also see that they're using sort of these titles. These end up being kind of alphabetical order. So children's friendships comes earlier than friendship and 3As. So that is also a way to kind of figure out which order to list them in. And again, they're typically going to include, if we were going to have additional sources, right, this might be 2004C. So it's just going to indicate that with these little letters that are going to come as part of the date citation, that will still be part of the in-text citation as well. I want to say here too that this is getting into the really kind of nitty-gritty of the citation bit. So is this something that like your instructors or journals might look closely at? Maybe. But it's also getting a bit into the weeds here. So the important thing is like you're consistent about how you're labeling each of these sources in the in-text citation and in the reference page. But you can kind of try to figure out if one of them is more recent than the other. And you would go with chronological order. So whatever is appearing first. And that kind of makes sense, right? Like if we're using alphabetical order with A, B, and C, it makes sense that we might be starting with an older piece and kind of working up with the more recent pieces. Does that get at your question there, Caleb, or does it make it more complicated?
No, it does. And I appreciate it. And I also realize we're at time. So the only other thing that I'll ask is, I think I heard somewhere that you guys have, the Writing Center has a service that's offered where you can drop off papers. Can you explain quickly how that works? And then I promise I'll be done.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. I really appreciate you saying that, because I got so into these citation questions that I completely forgot to monitor time. So I really appreciate that. And I'm happy to stick around, but also if you all are all set, you can also feel free to pop out. So no pressure to stick around if you feel like you got what you need. So the Writing Center offers both in-person and online services. We offer 2 types of online appointments, and so this is where our drop-off service comes in. Our online sessions can either be live, so you would meet with us kind of like in a Zoom sort of setting. You would still talk live with one of our writing consultants. But we also offer what we call drop-off appointments or asynchronous appointments. So for these sessions, you still make an appointment, you still upload your paper, you let us know what you'd like some feedback on, but you don't actually meet with anybody. And instead you get written feedback within 48 hours. So it's not sort of like instantaneous feedback, but might be kind of similar to the kind of feedback you might get with like from an instructor, right? So you're just getting kind of feedback or marginal comments or those sorts of things. I think these sessions can be really helpful for grad students, especially as your schedule gets busy. They're not ideal for, you have a paper due tonight, unfortunately, we're not going to get you that feedback in time for that. So they're really good if you're able to plan ahead. And if you have particular questions about citation or organization or other sorts of things, it's just really helpful if you can give us as much information as possible, so that we can kind of go from there and give you the best feedback possible, since there's no opportunity for like a two-way conversation in those kinds of sessions. If on the other hand, you're like, you really want to brainstorm ideas, I would not make a drop-off session for that, right? Where you really need that conversation. So yeah, these can be really good. A lot of our grad writers use these in combination with our live sessions. All of our appointments are scheduled through the same system. So that's still the go.osu.edu/get-feedback page, which again tells you a little bit more about the different types of appointments we offer. Other questions, concerns, like I said, I'm happy to stick around. I know we didn't get into those citation management questions, but I can send along some resources there too.
Just to clarify real quick, you said 48 hours. I assume that's 48 hours from the appointment? not
Correct.
48 hours from making. Okay, just double check.
Yeah, that's sort of the easiest way that we can keep track of it. So today's Tuesday. Let's say you made an appointment for today, Tuesday at 2 p.m. You would have feedback by Thursday at 2 p.m. Now you might have it much sooner. You could have it today. You could have it tomorrow morning. But it's just, as many of you know, if you teach, right, that's just a time-consuming process. So we try to budget that into the timing.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So, other questions, comments, concerns, resources you love? Alrighty. Well, thank you all so much for being here today, and asking questions and engaging with all of this and just showing up. I know you have a lot of demands on your time, so I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to talk about the very exciting topic of citation. And I'm happy to stick around if those of you have questions you don't want to ask in front of the whole group. And I think we can start.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Did you say you will upload the PowerPoint?
Yes, I am going to pass it along to Annie and Crystal, and they can share it with everybody who registered.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Thank you so
yeah,
much.
and I can do that this afternoon, so you should be able to get it pretty quickly. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Righty.